Every church has a heart. Those things that church prioritizes, those things that church emphasizes, those things that are important to the church as a body, to the people of the church. And I really believe that the heart of this church is good. As I've come to know the staff, as I have come to know various elders and you folks, this church has a good heart. But I know that sometimes churches can go one way or another, depending upon what truly is in our hearts. And that concerns me. So this morning we're going to take a look at two houses. As we go to the scriptures in Luke chapter 7, we're going to be looking at verses 36 through 50. This is a wonderful story about Jesus going to the house of Simon the Pharisee. And as we look at this, we're going to look at Simon's house. What kind of environment was it there in Simon's house? But we're also going to look at Jesus' house, because when Jesus comes into a house, something changes in that house. And it did that day in Simon's house. And we're going to look at Jesus' house as far as what he makes of Simon's house. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you at the end of this message, which house would you choose? Simon's house or Jesus' house? That's hard to say, Jesus' house. So, Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 50, we're going to read through the whole thing and then we're going to go back and dig into it a little bit more. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love is shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. The other guests began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. What a beautiful story. What a wonderful story of grace. But there's more here as well. Now, when we look at this, if you're new to the Bible, this whole foot washing thing might kind of throw you off a little bit. I looked at a number of different artist depictions of the woman, the sinful woman, washing Jesus' feet. And some of them had her under a table. Because, that's the only thing the artist knew about. If you're sitting at a table, somebody has to wash your feet, then they've probably got to get under the table. But for those of us who are schooled in this biblical world, we know that people of that time in that area reclined at tables. And so your feet would be kind of hanging out the back. So actually pretty good access to your feet. But this still seems like a very bizarre thing to take place. But we have to understand what is behind all of this. So first of all, for just a little while, we're going to take a look at the house of Simon. Now, Simon invited Jesus to his house for dinner. Now, we would think that's nice, right? Because why do you invite somebody over to your house for dinner? Maybe you want to get to know them. Maybe they're old friends and you just enjoy spending time with them. But unfortunately, Simon probably did not invite Jesus over for any of these two reasons. In fact, if you just go back a chapter into Luke chapter 6, you find that Jesus has a couple of run-ins with the Pharisees. And both of those run-ins centered about Jesus doing something on the Sabbath, as the Pharisees believed breaking the Sabbath. And so in both of those places, it says something to the effect of, and so they were watching out for some way that they could accuse Jesus or what they could do to him. And so more than likely, this was no coincidence that Simon invited Jesus to his house. More than likely, he was trying to find something that would discredit Jesus, something that he could learn that would help the Pharisees in their case against Jesus. And so it wasn't for good reasons that he invited him for dinner. Now, if I asked you right now, so which house do you think Eastmont Church should be like? You would automatically reject the Pharisees' house, right? Because we don't like Pharisees, do we? If you've been in church for longer than a few days, you know about the Pharisees. And you know they're like the biblical scum of the earth. Jesus had some very harsh words for the Pharisees, didn't he? But I want to take a little different look at the Pharisees. As somebody who's trained as a therapist, I was selected to be a family life chaplain in the Army. So that meant that the Army sent me for an additional master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And I figured that wasn't enough. Plus, I really wanted to, it was from a secular university, actually Texas A&M. But I wanted to really take a look at it more from a biblical theological point of view. And so I studied for my doctorate with Gordon Conwell, also in marriage and family therapy. And so when I look at someone who comes in for me or to me for counseling, I don't point fingers. I don't blame. In fact, therapists are supposed to be non-judgmental. And that's the way I am. Not like secular therapists, because they'll be so non-judgmental that they'll just try and make you feel comfortable with the sin in your life. That's not what I do as a pastoral counselor. But we can still be non-judgmental. I don't care what your behaviors are. I want to find the source of those behaviors. What is making this happen? And what can we do about that? And so when I look at the Pharisees, I want to know, all right, these guys are a pretty motley crew. These guys do have some really bad attitudes, and they're puffed up with pride. What made them this way? And I'm pretty sure I discovered what exactly that was. How many of you like to do a yearly Bible reading program? Just a few hands. Maybe I can invite you, more of you, to. It's a wonderful thing to do. And I don't do it every year. Some years I just focus more on certain books or on the New Testament. But it's good to get the whole scope of Scripture. I have a daily reading Bible. In fact, I bought them. I bought it when I went to Bosnia, deployed to Bosnia. And we were only there for 6 to 7 months, so I had to double up the reading, but I got through it in a year. It's a good way to really understand the full scope of Scripture. But when you read the Old Testament, if you make it through Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, and the nice thing about the daily reading program is it's in little chunks. So you're not stuck trying to read 5 chapters of Leviticus, which has been the death of many Bible reading programs through the years. But one of the things that when you get into the prophets are filled with doom and gloom, and then some like gems, some bright stars, some bright lights. And so if you can wade through the doom and the gloom, then you find some wonderful things, especially the Messianic prophecies, the prophecies about Jesus and how God was going to fix this whole mess that men had created. But one of the things that you very quickly find was that the Jewish people, the Israelites, were stiff-necked, they were stubborn, they were rebellious. In fact, God says, that's why I chose you. I chose you even though I knew that you were this kind of people. And so that gives us all hope because we can all be stiff-necked and stubborn and rebellious. But one of the things that the Israelites continually did was they ran away from God. And they ran away from God by worshiping the idols of the people around them, by intermarrying with those people, by breaking God's law. And so as you read through Isaiah and Jeremiah, and Ezekiel's really a weird one, but like I said, there's some nuggets in there that makes it worth reading. And the minor prophets, you find again and again that God is calling his people back to him. Why? Because they have strayed away from him. Even as you read 1st and 2nd Kings and Chronicles, you see all of these kings who, you get a good king who follows God with all his heart, and then you get a mediocre king who follows God a little bit, and then you get a total pagan who worships all the other gods around. And so the end result is, let's see if I remember my Bible history. In 528 BC, 722 BC, the Assyrians came in and basically took out the Israelites. They deported most of the people, and they basically massacred many others and destroyed their cities. In, was it 568? 586. Okay, dyslexic. Okay, so 586 BC, the Babylonians came and captured Jerusalem and carried off the Israelites. So they come in, they destroy everything and deport all the people. And so God, according to his promises, brings his people back after 70 years after Nebuchadnezzar had conquered Jerusalem. And I was just reading, the last two books that I read were Ezra and Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the one who came back and built the walls. Ezra was the priest who came back and began to teach the people. Well, in the very last part of Ezra, you find that Ezra goes back to be with the king of Persia for a short time because he had been his cupbearer. And he comes back and he finds the children of Israel breaking the Sabbath. They were buying and selling on the Sabbath, making it like a day like any others. And they were also intermarrying with the people around. And so Nehemiah takes them to task. In fact, it says he even lays hands on some of them. Why? Because they had just come out of captivity. After centuries of following God, not following God. And then finally God's judgment comes upon them and they're deported and their land is ravaged. And now they're doing the exact same things that had led to that. Wouldn't that tick you off? It's like when you tell your kids again and again and again and again, and then they do the exact same thing. Well, the Pharisees arose because they didn't want to they wanted to get off of this merry-go-round that they had been on. And so the Pharisees decided that we are going to keep the law of God. So that's a good thing, right? They started off with good intentions. But the law can be kind of iffy a little bit. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, right? So how many of you had a bowl of cereal this morning? All right, so did you work this morning? And even though for the Jews the Sabbath was Saturday, still, this is like our Sabbath, right? So is that okay to have a bowl of cereal this morning? Is it work to pour the cereal in the bowl and to pour in the milk? Or is it not? Well, these are valid questions if you really, really, really don't want to break the Sabbath, right? And so they began to gather all the religious experts, and they would debate these things. Well, maybe you can have, half a cup of milk, but not a full cup of milk, because that takes too much effort, and so that would be work on Saturday. I'm just making that up, right? But that's the way that they tried to work all these things out. So as a result, they came up with over 612 laws. Or, 613, I guess that is over 612. So 613 laws that they came up with in the Torah. And these were the laws that the Pharisees followed as closely as they could. And so it all started off with good intentions. They wanted to keep God's law, right? But with anything that man makes up, eventually becomes corrupted, doesn't it? Because we are corrupt in our hearts. And so it turned out to be a way that you could compare other people, that you could exclude other people, that you could look at yourself and say, I'm better than everybody else. And that's the group that Jesus came upon as he ministered on this earth. So, Simon is a perfect example of that. Because if you have all of these rules and you believe you keep them, then what do you do best? You judge, right? You compare yourself to everybody else. You judge other people. Now, some of you may be saying, the Pharisees, I still have the same attitude about them. But I would say that all of us have some Pharisee in us. Do you believe that? We all do, don't we? Sometimes I sit over on this side. In fact, usually we sit over on this side. I like to sit in one place so you get to know all the people around you, and then you move to another place and just really throw everything off sitting in somebody else's seat or something. But it's always good to shake up the saints every once in a while. But sometimes when I sit over there and I watch people worshiping, I'll see somebody standing like this, and I'll say, well, what's wrong with them? And I'll stop worshiping and start worrying about why do they have such a mean look on their face when they're here, they're supposed to be worshiping Jesus. Or maybe we start clapping hands. And a lot of people don't clap. And I tell you what, I'm there with you because I used to not be able to clap at all. I mean, it was too hard to read the words and sing and clap. It was more than I could do. But one of the nice things about the chapel system is you get to worship with a whole bunch of charismatics. A lot of times you get to worship with a lot of African Americans who really have rhythm. And so you learn to clap. And so I can tell you that even this old white guy has learned how to clap. It can be done. But if you don't want to clap, you don't have to clap. And I shouldn't be over there thinking, what's wrong with them? Why don't they clap? Maybe you were just like me probably 15 years ago. And so I apologize for judging any of you for, the way that you worship. But that's what we do, don't we? We have our own rules about what is right and what is wrong, what is good, what is bad in worship and in many other areas. Usually we take the things that are our own struggles and we just kind of downplay them. And we take the things that we can do well, the things that, we get an A on, we get a star. And those are the things that we compare other people. And that's how we said pride is when we look at another person's weaknesses and compare them to our strengths. And we just kind of downplay our own weaknesses, right? Do we do that? Well, that's what the Pharisees did. They could keep those 613 laws to the letter, but their hearts were bad, and they disregarded other parts of the law. Jesus said this in Luke 18, verse 9, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. This is quite a prayer, isn't it? But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then Jesus says this, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. You ever exalt yourself? I know I do. I know I do. And that's exactly what Pharisees do. So yes, all of us have a little bit of Pharisee, or maybe a lot of Pharisee in us. I want you to do this. This might kind of shake you up a little bit. Like I said, sometimes it's good to shake up the saints. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to say, "You look very nice today." Okay, but we're not stopping there, all right? But underneath all that niceness, okay, say that. Okay. You are a hot mess. One more thing. And so am I. All right. Now that's one of my daughter Natalie's favorite expressions. It's not just a mess, it's a hot mess. And so that's an amplified mess, apparently. So we are all hot messes underneath, regardless of how nicely we clean up for church. I've got my best flannel shirt on today. I love contemporary services, man. The suits, forget it. Ties, forget it. I love this. Oh, these are my best jeans, too. But you don't see what is underneath, do you? And I look at you, and you all look nice today. But I don't see what's underneath. Unless you come in for counseling. But it doesn't surprise me, because I know it's there. I know it's there. I know how corrupt all of us are. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I don't even know my own heart. And that's the way all of us are. And that's the way Simon was. So in Simon's house, this is the summary. We come to Jesus and his church behind a mask, creating a reality that denies our true condition before God and holding us up as the standard of godliness by which we judge and condemn others. This leads to our creation of a Jesus who conforms to our standards, and then seeking to force everyone who desires to associate with us to be just like us. I grew up in a fundamentalist Baptist church, and we were experts at this. We had our Torah. It wasn't 613 rules. It was much less. You show up to church whenever it's open. You don't smoke. You don't drink alcohol. You don't dance. Even if you're happy, you don't dance. You can dance on the inside, but don't dance on the outside. And you can't go to movies. And people used to say about us, we know you more for what you're against than what you're for. And that was absolutely true. And the nice thing about that, the thing that appeals to us as humans, is you kind of know what you need to do. You don't do this, you do that. Everybody looks at you and they think you're golden. They think you're a saint of God. But after a while, you hang around the church long enough, you find out that underneath all of that those people don't look so good. And that's what it is for all of us. But then, we're just real briefly going to look at the house of Jesus. And it's funny, Jesus came to Simon's house. It was his house. But everything changed as he was there. What do you think it was like for that woman who was a sinful woman? She had a reputation in town. What do you think it was like for her to come to the house of a Pharisee? Yow. None of us like to be judged, do we? We don't like people to judge us. And did she think she was going to be judged? Oh, I'm sure she knew she was going to be judged. She was probably judged all the time because everybody in town knew that she was a sinful woman. But she came anyway. She came anyway. Why? Because she was desperate. Because if we take a look at our sin, and we see how sinful we are, even pastors who've been in the ministry for 32 years, we understand that we desperately need Jesus. And so she came to Jesus, and he met her just as she was. And that's the beautiful thing about Jesus. Why is it that we think that we can hide all of our sin while we're in church? Nobody else is going to know, what kind of a person that I really am, even though they're that same kind of person underneath. And so we hide it when Jesus knows all about us. And you know what? He's even written in the scriptures for everybody to read all about us. All of us are the same in this. And Jesus gave her exactly what she needed. She needed forgiveness. She needed forgiveness. She needed salvation. And what she did may seem bizarre to us. She wept. She drenched his feet with her tears and then wiped his feet with her hair and then poured perfume on them. But she did that because Simon, the Pharisee, did not provide that for Jesus, and this was customary, and Jesus calls him on it. It says, Simon, you didn't give me any water for my feet, but this woman has drenched my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but she has not ceased to kiss my feet from the time that she came in. You did not put any oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. And then he says that he tells a little parable, and Simon guesses the right answer, that there were two people who owed money to a moneylender. One, 500 denarii. Denarii is about a day's wage. So 500 denarii, that's like a year and a half of pay. The other one, 50, month and a half. Still a pretty good sum. But he forgave them both. And Jesus asks, which do you think will love him more? Well, the one who was forgiven more. The guy who owed a year and a half of his pay. And Jesus said, you have judged rightly. He said, those who are forgiven little love little. But those who are forgiven much love much. And that kind of makes us think that Simon didn't have a lot to forgive. But he did. Oh, he did. But his perception was he didn't. And because of his perception that, God got a real deal with me, he loves little. He does not recognize the depth of his sin and what Christ did to save him. He doesn't recognize that. And we're often that way as well. I was saved when I was 8 years old. I trusted Jesus Christ as my Savior. Now, you think before that time, I was lost. I was a sinner, right? But I was not a terrible 8-year-old. I was actually a pretty good kid. You could even ask my mom. And so how much sin did Jesus have to forgive me for? What could you do as an 8-year-old? Well, I remember a few things, but we have to remember that Jesus did not just forgive that sin, but every single sin I've committed since I was 8 years old. And I'm ashamed to say I have been busy. And so when we think that God does not have much to forgive for us, we are wrong. And so none of us should love just a little. That's why Paul prayed for the Ephesians, and he prayed for them that they would be able to understand the height and the depth, the breadth of Christ's love for us, for them. Because when we love little, it's just that we don't realize how much God has done for us. And so in Jesus' house, we don't put on any masks. We come just as we are. In Jesus' house, we understand that even though you look nice, you're a hot mess, and so am I. And so we don't have to expend all of that energy to put on that facade. But we just know how it is. And that doesn't mean we have to stand up in front of everybody and do like a Jerry Springer show and, let it all hang out. But with those people that God places us together, small group, confidants, friends, we can be who we are. That doesn't mean we embrace our sin, because sin harms us. But it does mean that we don't struggle alone with our sin because nobody can see behind the mask, but instead, we help each other in the struggle. Because we know that all of us, in some way or another, are struggling with sin. That's what takes place in Jesus' house. He's there to give us what we need more than anything else. We come to Jesus and his church just as we are. This is the final summary. Accepting the reality of the ever-present sinfulness in ourselves and others, believers and unbelievers alike. Recognizing our desperate need for a Savior. Openly bringing our wounds and scars caused by sin and accepting Jesus for who he is as revealed in the Scriptures, as he works in each of us according to his plan to make us like him. That's the kind of church that Eastmont needs to be. That's the kind of church that, as I've worked with a staff, that they desire for Eastmont to be. Where someone doesn't have to be so desperate when they come here that they're willing to take the barbs and arrows of our judgment, but rather we accept them as sinners who need Jesus, just as we are sinners who need Jesus. And here, they can find forgiveness. We can find forgiveness.